For the past few days, I've been alone at home, just me in an empty apartment. A little while ago, my boyfriend got offered a really good job in another state. We've been wanting to move out of Florida for a long time. So when he got the job, we packed up and left town, even though we had already paid rent for a whole month in our old apartment. I didn't get to say bye to some really close friends, I thought to myself. Since we'd already paid the rent for the month, I decided to return by myself and spend a couple more weeks here. Luckily, my job gives me the flexibility to work remotely or from the office in Florida. So even though the apartment feels empty without my boyfriend, I still have a good place to work and keep me busy. When I said the apartment was empty, it wasn't totally true, I admitted. I had a big piece of furniture that I chose to sell instead of taking with us. So I put it up for sale on Craigslist. But here's where things took a weird turn. I put my address on the post, but it didn't stay up for long. Thankfully, the furniture sold on the same day, which was nice. Since I posted the ad yesterday, some strange stuff has been going on. At first, it didn't seem too weird. But you see, I have a cat, so I'm used to hearing noises all the time. Most of the time, it's just him being his mischievous self. He enjoys knocking things over either for fun or to annoy me. One evening, while I was lying on my air mattress, reading my favorite book, I heard a lot of noise coming from the kitchen. Is it just him being noisy again, I wondered. Shrugging it off, I went back to reading, assuming it was just the cat causing a ruckus. Then I remembered, wait, my cat isn't even here. We took him to our new place. So I awkwardly rolled off the air mattress, trying to be as quiet as possible. I went to the kitchen to see what was making the noise, and there I found a few red Solo cups that had been on the counter, now scattered on the floor. I looked around and the only thing I could think of was that the fan was on and it blew them off. That's what I convinced myself to believe, so I could sleep, I muttered to myself. But the truth is, those cups had been on the counter all day, and the fan had been running for hours. Why did they suddenly fall now? I tried not to think about it too much. I turned off the lights, read a bit more on my Kindle, and eventually fell asleep. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange noise I recounted. It sounded like someone was shaking a jar of coins or a set of keys. I'd never heard anything like it before. It seemed like it was coming from outside the apartment, but it was really loud. As soon as I got out of bed, the noise stopped. I turned on all the lights in the house, but I couldn't find where the noise was coming from. So I went back to bed with all the lights still on. It felt safer with the lights on, and I fell asleep quickly. When I woke up this morning, I continued. I didn't notice until I turned on the bathroom light that all the lights in the house were off. No one has ever said I sleepwalk, I pondered, but I couldn't think of any other reason why all the lights were off. The front door is locked with a deadbolt and a regular bolt, I reassured myself. After I showered and dressed, I looked for my keys but couldn't find them in my purse. I thought maybe I accidentally put them in the freezer with the groceries or left them on the kitchen counter, I speculated. But I checked everywhere and they weren't there. I looked in the freezer, microwave, counters, but my keys were nowhere to be found. Then I remembered the jingling sound I heard during the night, I recalled. I checked outside even though it was unlikely for my keys to be there. The only way they could have ended up outside is if they fell out of my bag when I came into the house, I reasoned. I stepped outside and there were my keys on the welcome mat outside my front door, covered in something red. That's when I realized I might have messed up by putting my address on Craigslist for that ad, I admitted. I'll see what happens tonight, but I'll be honest, I confessed. I'm starting to think I might leave early and not stay here for the rest of the rent. My current phone has become a bit slow, so I decided to buy a new phone from Craigslist. Within a few minutes, I stumbled upon what seemed like the perfect deal, a brand new iPhone 12 for just $400. So I tried to contact the seller right away. However, they didn't respond. I found it a bit odd, but I brushed it off, thinking they might be busy. I kept messaging them, but still no reply. Eventually they did. He only sent me his address, nothing else, I recalled when I replied. He didn't say anything more and just kept ignoring me after giving me the address. The next day I made a dumb decision and went to his house. As I drove down the rough street, it looked like no one lived in any of the houses, but I simply ignored it and went to his place. The house was dark, and the wood looked old and bumpy, I remembered. As I walked to the front door, I saw that the grass was tall and rough, almost up to my knees, like a whole foot high. When I got closer to the front door, it just swung open, and I almost tripped on the rocky ground behind me. Then out of nowhere, the guy came out and yelled, "Do you want the phone or not?" He had a deep voice. "Yeah, I have $400 in cash." "Is that okay?" I asked nervously. He grabbed it from me and slammed the door in my face. I started yelling, "Hey man, what's going on?" I was getting angry and upset at the same time, not knowing what to do. He kept me waiting at the door for what felt like a really long time. Eventually, he opened it just enough to hand me the phone. I took it and said thanks. Then I turned around and walked away, not hearing him close the door. When I started my car, I looked back and saw him still staring at me. It gave me the creeps. So I pushed down hard on the gas pedal and sped off down the street. When I got home, I was too tired to set up the phone, and I fell asleep as soon as my head touched the pillow. When I woke up and turned on the phone, I noticed something odd. I realized it was still logged in with the previous owner's account. Probably the creepy guy who sold it to me, feeling a bit nosy and curious, I thought. I opened the phone, and it turns out the guy didn't even have a password. When I opened the phone and went to the home page, I navigated to the Photos app. But when I opened it, there was nothing there, no photos in the camera roll. But then I checked the albums, and that's when I found something. There was an album titled "A Fun Night" with a winking emoji at the end. I thought the pictures or videos in there would be really unique, but they weren't. There were only 2 videos. Then I did something I regretted. I played the first video I admitted. When it started, the screen was black, and all I could hear was the sound of gentle rain. After a few seconds, the camera moved up, startling me. It happened so fast. The camera was facing a car outside, staying focused on it for more than 30 seconds. What's happening? I thought to myself, confused as I sat on my bed watching this video. Then, suddenly, a woman opened the car door and stepped out. I didn't know this woman, and I'd never seen her before. The camera kept focusing on her, and then a man started laughing like a maniac. That's when I froze. I recognized that voice I recalled. It was the same voice as the man who sold me this phone. I wondered, is this video some kind of joke? After the first video ended, I watched the second one. I noticed it was much longer than the first. The first one was 2 minutes long, but this one was 7 minutes. It began with a black screen and the sound of rain, just like the first one. But this time it was in an old warehouse. Around 45 seconds in, I heard faint crying like a woman's. I didn't watch the video, I confessed, because my gut feeling told me something wasn't right. I didn't waste any more time and called the police. I showed them the video and explained how I got the phone. Thankfully, they took it seriously and went to the creepy guy's house. But he was already gone. The house wasn't his. It was just an abandoned house. The police took my phone to find more information. It has been a while, and I still haven't gotten my phone back. So next time I concluded, I should just buy a phone from a mobile shop. I often go for walks around my neighborhood, but this time I decided to explore new territories. So one day I found out there's a park a few miles from my house. The park is really big, with lots of trees and open spaces. As I was walking around enjoying the sights, I reminisced. I spotted the opening of a trail that seemed different from the ones I usually take. It really caught my eye, so without thinking much, I started exploring it. It was getting darker, probably just after 7 o'clock, I noted. And because of that, I wasn't planning on going too far from the main path. The park had a rule that everyone needs to leave by a certain time. Also, I didn't want to be alone in the woods when it got dark. So after walking for a bit, I ended up leaving the main trail and exploring a different part of the park. I must have walked for more than a mile. When I figured it was time to head back home, it was getting darker, and I was worried about getting lost. But just before I decided to go back, I continued. I saw a cabin off to the left in the distance. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to go check it out. I'm really glad I did, I reflected, even though the night turned out to be the scariest night of my life. As I approached the cabin, the daylight seemed to fade away rapidly, making everything dark. I knew I should have left, but I couldn't resist checking out the cabin. I started worrying about how far I'd wandered, I admitted, thinking I might be on someone's private land. This park isn't like a camping site or anything, it's just a regular park. So when I saw there was a cabin, it surprised me. I couldn't tell if someone lives there or what was going on with it, but it clearly seemed like nobody had taken care of it for years. Suddenly I heard a loud noise, I recalled. That sounded like someone hitting something really hard. It scared me, and I almost ran off. But then I took a few steps closer to see where the noise was coming from. When I went to the back of the cabin, I saw a girl about my age in the basement, banging on the window and shouting for help. I could tell right away that something was really bad, I remembered. I ran to her and tried to open the window, but then she looked even more scared and signaled me to be quiet by putting her finger to her lips. I understood right away that she wanted me to stay silent. I saw I couldn't open the window, I explained, and I knew I had to do something fast, so I tried to call the police on my phone, but there was no signal. I felt really scared and didn't know what to do. I went as close to the window as I could and used my phone's notes app to ask her if she was in trouble. She nodded yes, I recounted. Then I told her if she knew if there was anyone else in the cabin or around the property at that moment, but she shook her head, indicating she had no clue. I assured her that I would help her escape and to keep calm. I ran to the front of the cabin. I continued, carefully scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger, and quietly tried to turn the doorknob, but as expected, the front door was already locked. So I walked around the whole cabin trying to open every window, but they were all locked too. So I ran to the woods, searching for something to break a window with. After a while, I found a big stone that looked like it could work. I hurried back to the girl, showed her the stone, and then I threw the stone as hard as I could at the window, breaking the glass completely. She got up, and I grabbed her hand to pull her out, but it didn't work. The window was too small for her to fit through. That's when I did something unexpected, but it was necessary, I admitted. I went to the side of the cabin and smashed one of the big windows with the same stone. I peeked inside to make sure nobody was there, and luckily I didn't see anyone. Then I jumped into the cabin. I carefully checked every room, and it seemed like nobody else was there. Then I went to the basement and found her. Someone had locked her up there alone in a small cage, about 5 by 8 feet. She had lots of bruises, scars, and dried blood on her body. I finally found a big hammer, I recounted, and I used it to break the lock open. I rushed to the girl, but she was so thirsty and hungry that she could hardly move. I helped her upstairs and put some shoes on her that I found near the front door. We hurried as much as we could and went straight to my car. Since we had a long way to go, and she was limping while I had to carry her, it was going to take some time. While we were leaving the front porch, I remembered, we heard a car far away. It was getting dark, so we could hardly see anything. Emily, the girl I rescued, thought it might be the man who kidnapped her. I didn't want to take any risk, so we kept walking. He was getting closer, so we had to hurry to avoid being seen. We moved as fast as we could, considering the situation, and thankfully, he didn't spot us. We were far away by the time he reached the cabin. I'm not sure how long it took him to realize Emily had escaped, I admitted. I took her to the hospital, and she told the police everything she knew about the man and what he did to her. I stayed by her side at the hospital, comforting her until we received assurance from the doctors that she was going to be fine. I never had the chance to get a full report from the police, I confessed, and I don't know where Emily is today, but I hope she is doing well. For me, I still have nightmares about that night. Last year I attempted to sell my 2007 Mercury Mariner, which was in pretty good shape despite having a lot of miles and being rather old. Nonetheless, it ran very well and was a reliable car. Opting to list it on Craigslist due to previous positive experiences buying cars there, I took several pictures of the vehicle and posted the ad. On the second day, I received a text message response from a man named Owl, expressing interest in purchasing the car. He appeared confident about it from the start, and since I had set a reasonable price, I provided him with my address for a viewing. Living in an apartment building, I didn't perceive any risk in sharing my address, as the complex had multiple buildings, making it unlikely for Owl to determine which apartment was mine. We arranged for him to visit the following day after his work at 9 p.m. Preparing the car for the viewing, I cleaned it out in anticipation of the potential sale. When the appointed time arrived, I left my apartment and headed to the parking lot, where Owl soon parked nearby. He emerged from his vehicle, a burly man adorned with numerous tattoos, standing about 6 feet tall and weighing around 250 pounds. After introductions, I showcased the Mariner to him, and he inspected it thoroughly. Following a brief period, Owl expressed interest in taking it for a test drive. Accompanying him, we drove around the block and nearby streets. He conveyed satisfaction with the vehicle, leading me to believe a sale was imminent. Upon returning to the apartment complex and parking the car in its original spot, Owl unexpectedly announced that he needed more time to consider the purchase. Disappointed by the sudden turn of events, I reluctantly bid him farewell. As we parted ways, Owl surprised me by asking if he could use my bathroom quickly. This seemed sketchy, I thought to myself. Why did he think it would be okay with me for him to use my bathroom? I voiced my concern, saying no to his request, and started walking away. The situation felt suspicious, and I was afraid it might be some sort of setup. I definitely didn't want this guy coming into my apartment. He lingered around by my car, and although my apartment building had both a side door and a front door, I decided to head towards the front. I left him standing there and made my way inside. There was a slight fear that he might follow me, but when I glanced back upon reaching the front doors, he was nowhere in sight. This reassured me, and I entered the building. Once inside, I turned right and entered the elevator, taking it up to the 3rd floor where my apartment was located. Stepping off, I started walking to the left, but then I spotted him entering the hallway from the door at the end, leading to a stairwell. What on earth was he doing here? Initially moving towards my door, I saw him heading in my direction. I quickly changed course, turning and walking the other way. Suddenly, I heard him start running towards me, prompting me to sprint to the end of the hallway. As I reached it, I darted into the stairs on the opposite side and descended. With Owl in pursuit, I made my way into the underground parking garage beneath the building. Racing across it to the far end, I managed to gain some distance. Despite this, I could still hear him chasing after me. Reaching the stairs on the other side, I ran up to ground level and exited through the side door. Once outside, I hurried to my car, got inside, and drove away. Calling the police as I left, I informed them about the situation. After circling the nearby streets for a few minutes, I returned. Owl's car was still there, but he was nowhere to be seen. The police arrived shortly after, and I didn't re-enter the building until they did. To my surprise, they discovered Owl attempting to break into another apartment. It became apparent that he had never been interested in buying my car. He was likely planning to rob me or worse. When I first moved to the city where I live now, I didn't have an apartment lined up or anything. Luckily, my sister was living just outside the city. She let me sleep on her floor when I first arrived. I had been out of the country traveling for about a year at that point, so a strange living situation was not that difficult for me. However, I was worried about wearing out my welcome, so finding somewhere to live was a priority. That's pretty difficult to do though, especially without a full-time job. I was constantly checking several sites online, and most larger buildings simply wouldn't rent to me without proof of employment. I spent a few days going to see basement apartments where the rental requirements were a little more relaxed, but I never found anything that seemed decent. One day when I was on Craigslist, there was a posting that was interesting. It was for a temporary sublet, just 2 months, and the poster explained that she was going away to visit family. That was fine because it would give me enough time to get things sorted out. By then, I would surely have a job, and then I could find a better place. The rent was high, about $1,600 a month if my memory is right, and I didn't have any better options, so I replied to the ad. A reply came from a woman named Janet, and we set up a time for me to see the place. It was a large 1-bedroom apartment in a small building right near the subway. On the day of the viewing, I went to the bank to get a bank draft, just in case I decided to take the place. That way I could lock it in right away. She had said that full payment was required up front. That was fine since it was only for 2 months anyway. When I was done at the bank, I got on the subway and took it to the apartment. It was only a 10-minute walk when I got off the train, so I was there in no time. When I got to the building, I sent a message to Janet, and she came out to let me in. There were only 6 apartments there, 3 floors and 2 apartments on each. The basement was just a small laundry room and storage. It was an older building made of light orange brick. It seemed outdated with old-style locks and an intercom system. They didn't have electronic locks like most modern buildings do. When we went up to the apartment, it was actually really nice, fully furnished and well decorated. After Janet showed me around, I offered to take it. I handed her the bank draft for $3,200, and she gave me her spare key. I was set to move in 3 days later. I spent the next few days at my sister's place and also visited some friends. Then I moved over to Janet's apartment. On my first day, I met one of my neighbors, a man named Jaden who lived next door. He was in his 30s and seemed friendly. We talked in the hallway for a while in front of my front door. He knew of the arrangement, so he didn't think that I was breaking in or anything. After about 10 minutes, Jaden told me that he was relieved I was moving in because he could use a break from Janet. I asked what he meant, I said, and he told me that the noise in the apartment could be pretty bad at times. We left it at that, and I didn't really find out what kind of noise he was talking about. The first few days at the place were all right. It was weird being in somebody else's apartment, but it was probably the most comfortable I had been in a long time. It was a big step up from my sister's floor. About a week after I moved in, though, I continued. I was in the living room in the evening when the intercom thing rang out of nowhere, and because I wasn't expecting anybody, I thought it was a mistake. I went over anyway and answered it. As soon as I did, all I heard was yelling on the other end. Again, I thought it was a mistake, so I tried to explain that I was not who he was looking for. But then the angry guy asked me where Janet was. That was when I realized that I might have gotten involved in something by accident. I told the guy that I was renting the place that Janet had left for 2 months. After that, the box went silent, and I was left standing there waiting for another angry tirade. It didn't come, though, and I went back to what I was doing. About half an hour later, the intercom box rang again. This time when I went over to it, it was the police. They asked me to come down. When I walked out to the street, there were 2 cops and another man standing there. They explained to me that this man claimed to be the rightful resident of the apartment. I was shocked and told them my side of the story. I even had proof of the bank draft that I used to pay Janet. The other man, however, had a lot more proof than me. He had bills and mail addressed to the apartment. And even though he wasn't on the lease, the cops decided that it was his place and I had to go. They only gave me 15 minutes to get my stuff. It was about 9 p.m. already. And luckily when I called my sister, she picked up, and I stayed with her that night. Over the next week, I recounted. I tried to get in touch with Janet. She was hard to find. Eventually, when we did talk, she admitted that the man was her boyfriend, where she claimed that the apartment was hers and he had no right to be there. That didn't do much for me, even though I was out thousands of dollars with no place to stay. After arguing with Janet for another week or so, she agreed to give me back half my money if I agreed not to pursue it further. I thought that was a bad and pretty insulting deal, but I just couldn't be bothered with that situation any longer. I took it and moved on. I still don't completely understand the laws with regards to that kind of thing. I admitted, but I got screwed pretty bad there. I made a sketchy deal with Janet. It was all under the table. I was never on any lease, and there was no real paperwork other than the bank draft. My advice to everyone is to keep things legal. Don't trust random people off the internet, and most importantly, stay out of other people's drama. I learned all of that the hard way. About 10 years ago, I moved to Seattle. When I arrived, I didn't have a job or a place to stay, and it's hard to rent a place without a job. Even though I had some money saved up, I didn't have many choices for where to live. So I looked at ads on Craigslist and Facebook, but it was rare to find a place that would let me rent it. Then one day I found a room to rent on Craigslist. It was one room in the basement of a house, and it had its own bathroom. It cost a lot, even though it was just a room. I believe it was about $800 per month, paid up front. When I got there, I recounted. The landlord welcomed me and gave me a tour of the house. The house was pretty old, and there wasn't a living room, only a kitchen and laundry room that everyone shared. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms, and downstairs there were 2 more at the time. 3 other people lived there, I noted, and they all seemed friendly. When I first met them, there was an older man called George, a young woman named Angela, and a guy around his mid-30s named Kirk. I didn't talk to them much because I was busy moving in and searching for a job. The first few days were kind of boring, I admitted. I'd see the other roommates around, but we didn't really talk much. It wasn't until about a week later that things got strange. I remember one day when I came home and noticed Kirk was acting weird. I recalled. I think he looked a bit upset. He kept walking around in the kitchen, and when he noticed me, his mood changed instantly. Then he said hi with a smile. That night I heard odd sounds coming from Kirk's room. His room was in the basement close to mine. It sounded like he was moving furniture or something. Now that I think about it, I realized that was definitely a warning sign. That morning I went to make coffee, and Kirk walked in. We didn't speak. But there was a weird feeling in the air. I recounted, and I felt really uncomfortable. Though I couldn't say why in the following days, I began to notice more strange things about Kirk. He would often come home late at night. I observed and I could hear him talking quietly to himself in his room. I thought he was on his phone at first, but that didn't seem right. I'm pretty sure he was talking to himself. One night, I woke up to the sound of screaming. I continued. It was coming from Angela's room. I got out of bed and ran towards the room, but as I got closer, I could hear Kirk's voice, and he was saying something to Angela. I didn't know what to do, so I stayed back and listened. After a few minutes, the screaming stopped and everything went quiet. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I told Angela what happened. She looked really scared and didn't want to talk about it. I knew something was really wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, I admitted, but I didn't have any evidence that something was really wrong. I'm still not sure what happened that night. In the following days, Kirk seemed to get even worse, I recalled. He would get angry over small things then. About a week later, Kirk stopped coming out of his room altogether. I was starting to worry about my safety and the safety of the other roommates. It wasn't until a few days later that everything got really bad. When I came home from work, I explained. I found George sitting on the front porch. Looking very upset, he told me he went into Kirk's room to ask him to turn down the music, but he found something really scary. There were knives and other sharp things all over the room, George explained, and there was a big stain that looked like blood on the floor. We called the police, I recounted, and told them what George found. They came and searched the house. They found out that Kirk had left, probably running away as soon as George saw his room. The police found proof that he was planning something really bad, I added. They managed to find Kirk a few days later. He got arrested and faced charges. Two years ago, my girlfriend and I went on a trip in a car. We were supposed to drive for 2 days. At the end of the first day, we stopped to sleep. We found an old motel. It looked cool and had lots of colors, I recalled. There were small trees and plants everywhere. There was an old couple working there. They said they owned the place, and they were nice. We talked about our trip, and then we went to our room and unpacked. The room wasn't very nice. To be honest, I admitted. It was old and not updated. But we felt happy staying there because the old couple was friendly, and we wanted to support them. My girlfriend and I watched TV for a while before we got tired. Then I turned off the TV and lights, and we went to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up because I heard footsteps in our room, I recounted. I was still sleepy, so I looked around but didn't see anything and went back to sleep again. Later, I woke up again, feeling like someone was watching me. I looked up and saw the old couple standing at the end of the bed, smiling at me. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I asked them why they were there. The old woman said they were just checking if we were sleeping well, I explained. I thought they were crazy. My girlfriend said she was calling the police and took out her phone. The old man apologized and said it wasn't necessary. She called the police anyway. I told the old couple to leave our room. They kept saying sorry and then left. The police arrived within a few minutes, I continued. The old couple confessed to entering our room with a spare key. But they still said they just wanted to check if we were okay or not. This was one of the weirdest things I ever heard. The police asked if we wanted to press charges, but we said no. I felt sorry for them and thought they were just strange. The rest of our trip was good, but now whenever we stay at a hotel, we make sure to check the door twice. During my sophomore year of college, I was still living with my parents but commuting to school. It wasn't that far though, so it was no big deal. My dad was kind of overly protective, so he insisted on that arrangement. Just for context, I'm a girl and I was 21 at the time. I had my car already back then, and it was only about a 20-minute drive to school. This all started out when I realized that I really had to get a new phone. Mine had a battery that could barely hold a charge for the day, a screen that was cracked to the point where I could hardly use it, and I was afraid that it would stop working. That would have been a really big hassle for me, so I thought it was time to get a new one. Because money was tight, I turned to Craigslist, the go-to for broke college students. After scrolling past ads that ranged from sketchy to downright bizarre, I found a decent-looking phone that was listed by someone right in my area. The price was pretty good. He wanted $100, so I shot him a message. The seller turned out to be a guy named Alex, a student at my university. We exchanged a few messages back and forth through email, and we agreed to meet at the campus library. I figured that'd be a safe public place to make the exchange. After class on Friday, I went to the library to meet him. There was a cafe right near the front entrance, and as soon as I walked in, I saw him waving me over. I didn't know at the time how he recognized me, because I had never met him before. I now think that he looked me up on Facebook somehow, but I didn't realize that until later. He was friendly, maybe a little too much, but it didn't bother me at the time. He showed me the phone, turned it on, and confirmed that it wasn't locked to any network. I handed him the money, and then he offered to help me set it up. I took the SIM card out of my old phone and put it into the new one. It seemed to be working fine, but then Alex insisted that I send him a text just to make sure everything was working correctly. Without thinking about it too much, I sent a simple thanks to his number. That's when I realized that I might have made a slight mistake giving my number to a stranger. The conversations on Craigslist were protected. So you didn't have to give out your real info, he said. I left the library after that. I met up with a friend, and later in the evening I drove home. By the time I had made it back to my house, it was about 8 p.m. I went up to my room to do some homework, and then I put my phone on my desk. I noticed that I had a new message, and it was from Alex. It said, "Hey, it was nice meeting you," and then a smiley face. And as if that wasn't enough, it seemed. I didn't reply, though. I know that seems rude, but I didn't want to talk to him. Even though I wasn't replying, he kept sending more and more messages over the next few days. His messages grew more and more frequent and increasingly flirty. After a while, I did send a reply, pretty much trying to let him down gently, even though I thought it was weird that he wasn't taking my silence as a hint. I talked to my sister about it, I said, and she said that I should just block his number. I was close to doing that. The next time I checked my phone, there was a new message. The thing was a serious wall of text. It was pretty much confessing his love for me in a way that was pretty crazy. It was scary to know that he was out there at my school. My biggest fear at the time was that I would run into him, especially if I was alone. The student parking lot is a pretty secluded area, and I sometimes have to walk there when it's dark. That was my biggest concern. I made it through the next week without running into him at school. I continued, but the messages didn't stop. One night, after a particularly long and draining day of classes, I checked my phone to find a barrage of texts from him. Among the usual pleas and accusations, one message stood out. "Why are you ignoring me? I know you're there. I'll make you regret this." That message sent a chill down my spine because it was the first real threat. Feeling concerned and unsure, I decided to reach out to a friend who was studying law. She advised me to document everything, every message, every day, and every time. It was just in case things escalated and I needed to involve the authorities. Following her advice, I began screenshotting the messages, creating a digital paper trail of Alex's increasingly erratic behavior. I should have probably reported him right then, I admitted, but I decided to document things first. I also took your suggestion to firmly tell Alex to stop contacting me. That way he wouldn't have any excuse. So I sent him a message that was clear and to the point, basically saying as politely as I could to leave me alone. Not surprisingly, that didn't work. The messages kept coming, and I kept ignoring them. One day at school, I saw him outside in one of the courtyards at our campus, I recalled. I didn't think he saw me, so I did my best to stay hidden. Luckily, I was with two friends, so that made me feel more comfortable. That scare was the push I needed to report the whole thing. I went to one of the help desks at the student center and showed them everything I had about the incident. I don't know exactly how it was dealt with, but they must have given him a pretty serious warning at least, because I never heard from him again. I never wanted to get anybody kicked out of school, and I'm not sure if that actually happened. But I never saw him around again either. I ended up getting rid of that phone, and my dad bought me a new one, I concluded. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some kind of tracker in it, but that may have just been my paranoia, because I don't think that's actually possible. I couldn't risk it though. When the Xbox One first came out, I wanted one pretty bad, but they were basically sold out everywhere. I don't know if anyone else remembers, but it was pretty impossible to find one in my area. I was keeping an eye on some of the main websites and also checking Craigslist to see if one would come up. There were a few listed locally, but the sellers all wanted some crazy price, like double the retail price. I wasn't going to pay that, so I had to wait for a while. Eventually, I stumbled upon a listing on Craigslist that seemed good. The price was decent, but actually right around the new price. The seller said it was barely used though. After a few messages back and forth, I continued. We agreed on a price that had me feeling pretty smug about my negotiating skills. I managed to get him to budge by $20 or so. Because of my job, meeting up during the day was out of the question, so we settled on a time later in the evening. It was February, and the sun had gone down by the time I left work. We decided to meet in the grocery store parking lot, which was about a 30-minute drive from my work. I didn't know the place because it wasn't near anywhere that I had been, but I figured there'd be enough light and security cameras to keep things honest. On my way over, I stopped off at the bank to take out money and then kept driving over to the spot. I saw the grocery store on the corner of the street and pulled my car over to message the seller telling them I was there. They replied right away. So I drove into the parking lot. By the time I went in, there were only a few cars scattered around, most of which probably belonged to the store's late shift workers. I spotted a car that matched the seller's description and pulled up nearby. Stepping out of my car, I saw two guys waiting. I was a little surprised to see two of them since the messages had only been from one person, but I figured the seller brought a friend for some reason. We said hello and I followed them to their car expecting to see the Xbox. As we stood beside their car, the chill of the February night was cold. I tried to keep the conversation light and focused on the Xbox, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Neither of them had brought the console out yet, and they seemed more interested in small talk than anything else. So you got the Xbox in the car, I asked, hoping to steer the conversation back on track. Yeah, just give us the money, and we'll get it for you, one of them replied. That made me pretty uncomfortable, because I wanted to at least see it before handing over the cash. Can I see it before I pay, I asked. Trying to sound confident. There was an awkward moment of silence, and the vibe changed. The friendly facade fell away as one of them, the taller of the two, reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. It was a moment that felt surreal, like something out of a movie. The dark metal of the gun in the dim parking lot was all too real, though. Money now, he demanded, his voice low. I could hardly believe what was happening, but there I was, staring down the barrel of a gun. With shaking hands, I handed over the cash that I brought for the console, hoping that'd be the end of it. But it wasn't. With the money in their hands, they decided they weren't done with me yet. Let's take a walk, the one with the gun said. Then he motioned towards the back of the grocery store where an ATM glowed faintly in the darkness. I know I should have been trying to figure out a way out of this, but at the time I couldn't think clearly. I had no choice but to follow their orders. When we reached the ATM, the taller guy, the one with the gun, stood back slightly while his partner stayed far away. I think they were trying to stay out of range of the cameras. Every ATM has one, I think. Take out everything you can, he said. I remember thinking how absurd it was that I was about to drain my account for these thieves, but I had no choice. My hands were shaking as I punched in my PIN number. I think it took me 2 or 3 tries to get it right. The machine spat out the maximum amount that I could withdraw, $1,500. I think an amount that took me months to save. Gone in seconds. I handed it over, hoping against hope that it would satisfy them, but it wasn't. Your phone, one of them demanded. I hung my head, wondering where this all would end. I remember feeling a sense of hopelessness when I handed it over, knowing that I would have a hard time calling for help, which is probably the reason they wanted it at all. I gave it to them. No, like I had a choice. For some reason, maybe they forgot, but I didn't have to hand over my keys. Without those, I would have been really screwed. Finally, with my money and phone in their possession, they seemed satisfied. All right, you can go. Don't do anything stupid, the taller one said, motioning with the gun for me to leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked away as fast as I could without running, not daring to look back. Once I was sure I was out of their sight, I sprinted the rest of the way back to my car and locked myself inside. And I took a moment to let the reality of what had happened sink in. After a few moments to collect myself, I started my car and drove until I found a 24-hour convenience store. The clerk there allowed me to use the store's phone to call the police. The officers arrived, and I told them what happened that night. I got a pretty good look at both of them and the car they were driving, and I was pretty sure that there were cameras all over the place, so it shouldn't have been a real problem to find them. It took a few days, but the cops did make an arrest. They were able to get my phone back and most of my cash as well. I got the full $1,500 back from the ATM, but they must have lied about the amount for the Xbox. It ended up being short just about $100. I was really just glad that those jerks were caught. And yes, they did do time for the robbery. Roughly 2 years ago, I decided to sell my old phone on Craigslist after upgrading to a new one. The phone was only 2 years old and in good condition, so I thought it would attract buyers. After considering eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and Craigslist, I opted for the latter, prioritizing a quick sale over making a profit. Listing the phone at a reasonable price, I received a text message expressing interest within a few hours. The potential buyer, Molly, seemed eager, so we arranged to meet the following day outside a local strip mall, conveniently located for both of us. When we met, the transaction went smoothly, and Molly purchased the phone without any issues. Everything appeared normal during our brief interaction, and there were no red flags. However, things took a strange turn in the days that followed. Molly began texting me, initially asking me to come over, and then inquiring if she could visit my place. It was unexpected and out of context, considering our interaction had been solely about the phone sale. At first I wondered if she had the wrong number, but then she mentioned my name, indicating she was indeed contacting me intentionally. I had no interest in pursuing any further interaction with Molly beyond the sale, and her persistent texts, which continued late into the night and into the next morning, left me feeling uncomfortable and confused. Once again, Molly persisted in her attempts to come over, ignoring my previous attempts to deter her. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, I lied and told her I had a girlfriend, hoping she would take the hint and leave me alone. However, Molly disregarded my statement, insisting it didn't matter, and continued texting me as if we were close friends, asking about my activities. Feeling bewildered by her behavior, I asked her to stop, but she became angry and started hurling insults at me. Frustrated and alarmed, I decided to block her, hoping to put an end to the unsettling situation. Little did I know, the ordeal was far from over. Later that same night, I heard a knock at my front door. Peering through the window, I was stunned to see Molly standing outside. How did she find out where I lived? It was alarming to think she might have followed me home. Reluctantly, I answered the door, intending to firmly tell her to leave. However, as soon as I opened the door, Molly launched into a tirade of curses and refused to leave. Growing increasingly aggressive, she attempted to enter my house. In a panic, I slammed the door shut and locked it, but she persisted, banging on windows and trying to force her way inside. Realizing I needed help, I called the police and waited inside. Molly continued her relentless assault on my home, banging on windows and attempting to open doors. Even when I tried to reason with her through a window, she remained undeterred. Thankfully, the police arrived and were able to intervene, putting an end to Molly's alarming behavior. Subsequently, I obtained a restraining order against her, as I couldn't comprehend why she fixated on me so intensely. I suspected drugs might be involved, but I couldn't say for sure. This experience served as a stark reminder to exercise caution when using platforms like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. After my divorce about 2 years ago, once everything was settled, I relocated to a new city without a job or a proper place to stay. Renting a basement room was all I could afford with my meager savings, making it a rough time for me, to say the least. I was really eager to get back on my feet, desperate for a job. One evening, while scrolling through some job listings on Craigslist, I stumbled upon an ad for a receptionist position. The pay was minimal, but given my circumstances, that didn't even matter. In my twisted mind at the time, that was almost a plus, as if it indicated they might actually hire me, like it wasn't even worth decent pay. I quickly submitted my resume and a cover letter, not expecting much but hoping nonetheless. It wasn't the first job I had applied for that day, and I had probably sent out over 100 applications in the last week, only receiving a few responses. To my surprise, the very next day I did get a response from that one. The email was brief, asking me to come in for an interview at an address they provided. It seemed a bit rushed, but who was I to complain? I was excited because it'd be my first interview in a long time, and I was ready to get back to work. I looked up the address on Google just to get public transit directions, but I didn't delve into the area much. It wasn't downtown or in any business district in the city. When I got off the bus, I realized I was in a residential area, a housing development pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The bus only came every hour, and other than that, there'd be no other way to get there or back. The office turned out to be just a house, which seemed weird to me. Not wanting to jump to any conclusions, I proceeded cautiously. I thought maybe they ran a home office, but I felt silly for not looking into that in advance. I walked up to the front door and knocked. A man answered the door, not exactly what I expected. He was casually dressed, which was odd for a home office, but all things considered, the whole thing was looking very unprofessional. "You're here for the interview?" he asked. He invited me to come in, and I hesitated. Like I said, I was desperate at the time, otherwise I probably would have passed. The interior of the house looked nothing like an office. It was just a typical living room, albeit a bit cluttered, like someone who just moved in and hadn't put everything away yet. There were no desks and no computers inside, just a couch, coffee table, a TV, and some cardboard boxes. The man noticed my apprehension and chuckled. "Oh, don't mind the mess, we're very informal here." I forced a smile and then maybe squeezed out an awkward laugh. He led me to the kitchen, which doubled as his makeshift office, complete with a stack of papers and a single laptop. The interview started off with standard questions about my work experience and skills. His manner was unconventional, occasionally veering off topic to share personal anecdotes. It was odd, but I went along with it, answering these questions as professionally as I could. At one point, he even went to the fridge and got a beer. When that happened, it was almost enough for me to leave. I was pretty sure that he wasn't serious. The interview stretched on for almost 2 hours, but very little of it was about actual work. By the end of it, he offered me the job on the spot. "You're exactly what we're looking for," he said with a smile. The offer was tempting given my situation, but everything about that guy screamed that something wasn't right. I thanked him for the offer and then told him that I needed some time to think it over. To my relief, he let me leave. And when I stepped out of that house, I felt happy. I missed the bus by about 10 minutes, so I was left standing on that street corner for about 15 minutes before the bus finally came, and I was able to get home in one piece. Another week went by and I still didn't have a job, but I was checking Craigslist and some other sites every day. When I was scrolling through Craigslist, I saw a posting that was warning people about a creeper who was pretending to have work available. I clicked on it, and the details made it pretty clear that it was the guy who did the interview at his house. Yeah, I didn't say much about what he actually did. The post read, "But they did say that there was no job." I feel like I dodged a bullet with that one, because I was alone in that house with him while he let me go so easily. I don't know, maybe he didn't think I was good looking enough, but it could have been something else. I replied to the warning post to give my account, but I don't know what happened to the man with the fake job. One time, years ago, I was in the market for a TV and decided to browse Craigslist. I often found great deals or even free items there, although caution was always necessary. Upon discovering a promising ad for a reasonably priced TV, I reached out to the seller, expressing my interest in purchasing it. Within an hour, I received a response from a woman named Joy, confirming that the TV was still available. She provided an address and instructed me to come over the following night to make the purchase. The address seemed to be in a nearby neighborhood, so the next day, I prepared the cash and headed there. Arriving around 7 p.m., I parked in front of the house, situated in what seemed like an average neighborhood. When I knocked on the door, it was swiftly answered by a woman in her 30s with dark hair. She welcomed me inside, apologizing for the mess of boxes strewn around the living room. Joy mentioned that the TV was in her bedroom and led me down the hallway. Opening the bedroom door, she gestured for me to enter. However, upon stepping inside, I realized the room was empty. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. It all happened so fast Joy hadn't even entered the room. I attempted to open the door, but it was locked from the outside. Confusion and panic set in as I knocked and called out to Joy, but received no response. After several futile minutes, I accepted that I was trapped. With no furniture in the room, I was left alone in an eerie silence, wondering what was happening outside the locked door. I grabbed my phone and attempted to call my friend, but I couldn't get a signal. That seemed strange. Trying to open the door and calling for help yielded no response. It became evident that nobody was coming to my aid. Puzzled and anxious, I scanned the room, wondering what was happening. After several minutes, I heard noises emanating from outside the room, seemingly from the living room area. It was Joy and a man conversing, although I couldn't discern their words. Despite yelling out, I received no reply. Frustrated, I tried to open the window, but it wouldn't budge, further fueling my anger. Returning to the door, I pounded on it fiercely, desperate to break it down. Suddenly, a man's voice from down the hallway shouted at me to stop. Unsure of what these people were capable of, I hesitated briefly before taking action. Retrieving my phone, I turned up the volume and played the most annoying alarm noise, placing it at the far end of the room. Concealing myself behind the door, I waited. Within moments, footsteps approached the room, and the door swung open, revealing the man. As he moved towards the noisy phone, I emerged from my hiding spot, darting past him and fleeing the room. He attempted to grab me, but I narrowly evaded his grasp. Racing down the hallway, I encountered Joy in the living room, who tried to impede my progress. Dodging past her, I reached the door, with the man now in pursuit. Swiftly unlocking my car, I jumped inside and sped away. Unfortunately, I had left my phone behind, rendering me unable to call the police immediately. Stopping at the nearest gas station, I entered and asked the employee to contact the authorities. When they arrived, we returned to the house, where my phone was found abandoned on the street nearby. The perpetrators were nowhere to be seen, and it was revealed that they didn't actually reside in the home. It was rented by someone else. Unsure if they were ever apprehended, I discovered that the Craigslist post had been removed. After that harrowing experience, I vowed never to use Craigslist again.